Disclaimer: this is not an aesthetically pleasing video. Watch at your own discretion. Welcome to the Wasteland. The antithesis of beauty, this Mad Max-esque ecosystem, is an abject failure when compared to other closed terrariums I've created. But hidden behind this ugliness, we can find a certain charm, a certain... okay, I can't do this. It's not beautiful, guys. There's nothing charming about it. It's gross. It's not fun to look at. Everything about it sucks, and quite frankly, this habitat deserves to die a quick death. But we're talking about this Wasteland Terrarium today anyway, for two reasons. One, I want to talk about the mistakes I made in the creation of and early on in this terrarium's life. Mistakes that doomed this small ecosystem, and hopefully mistakes that I can prevent others from making in the future. And two, to put on display just how resilient some of its surviving occupants are. They've been in here for over a year. That's a long time to survive in these bleak conditions. But before we get into the story of this hellhole, let's do a quick count of invertebrate species because, as I said, some life forms have carved out a meager existence within this jar. Starting with the most obvious, we have isopods. And actually, I think there are technically two species of isopods inside this, so that's two species. Here's a centipede lurking in a subterranean passageway. I think that's actually the only centipede in here, but could be for sure. There's certainly other tunnels that aren't alongside the outside of the jar. So that's three. Number four, they're hard to spot, but this is also home to countless tiny springtails that we can see in this shot wandering across the glass. Here's a few different examples of these small worms that are inside the soil. Either some sort of a nematode, probably a nematode, possibly some kind of a flatworm. They somehow survive in this soggy substrate. There's another small worm here on the glass. Maybe you can't see it here next to this isopod, so we'll zoom in. Okay, a little better. It's blurry. It's tiny, a lot smaller than the other ones in the soil. So possibly 6. Could be just the same kind of nematode, but a juvenile. It's hard to say. We'll count it. That's 6. And finally, there's this small black mite that you can see in this shot here wandering around. There's quite a few of those in this habitat. So that's only 7 species of invertebrates. But that's more than 0, and more than I thought I'd find. In addition to the invertebrates, we also have moss, possibly another plant, though this could be a different moss species, I'm not entirely sure, and algae. Lots of algae. But let's get back to the origin of this grotesque creation. As you may have guessed, it was not created in this manner by design. Before the period that I call the Great Death, like many terrariums, this one consisted of flora and fauna from a natural habitat, in this case, the forests of the northern Midwest. It was meant to be an item of decoration. It is actually a large glass jar that sits below a lamp. My intent was for the lamp to provide the light for the interior of the terrarium, utilizing tinfoil on the inside of the lampshade. However, these plans soon failed to coalesce. And it started with the slugs. It was admittedly a rookie mistake on my part to not take out the slugs as soon as they were discovered. I thought they were interesting. There was at least 2 of them slugging their way around the jar. Those slugs are similar in some respects to snails. I find that slugs are not good roommates in many of these closed terrariums. They quickly set to gorging themselves on the plants within, at times going for stems and not just leaves, killing the plants entirely. And this killed most of, if not all, of the non-moss plants in this terrarium. Simultaneously, they slimed their way around the walls of the terrarium, while also leaving deposits of their waste, slug poop, all over the glass. You can see the remnants of it still. Their existence was unsightly, but also short-lived, because not too long later, not too long after this terrarium was created, the slugs inexplicably died. What the slugs had started with their voracious appetite for living plant matter, the isopods and other inhabitants nearly finished. At one point, nearly all of the moss within was consumed, and because this is an entirely sealed terrarium, it was nearly the demise of the residents. See, without plants, there's no oxygen. Without oxygen, the small animals within would soon die. Compounding this problem was also the problem of moisture. Getting the moisture level correct in an entirely sealed terrarium is tricky, but it's usually safest and easiest to make them a little too dry versus too wet. A dry terrarium will have a gradient of moisture, which can actually help many small animals to survive and can increase diversity, but if it's too wet, everything's wet, just like in this case. The substrate is wet, the moss is soggy, the air is constantly humid, and it limits diversity, and it also obviously limits the ability of many organisms, such as some plants, to survive. In fact, many plants will undergo a process of root rot in extremely humid and wet environments, especially when the soil is totally soggy like this substrate. Thus, due to these factors, the habitat underwent a period of die-off, the Great Death. Only the species we counted were the survivors. As I mentioned, the slugs died. So did the millipede. You can still see its carcass in this shot. Many of the isopods died, as did, I'm sure, some other varieties of springtails. At that point, I had effectively given up on the terrarium. I knew it would no longer serve as a decorative piece, but I didn't open it up. Instead, I opted to leave it sealed and see if anything would be able to survive. And remarkably, life found a way. Though it will never go on a mantle or grace an end table, this jar still harbors life. The moss stretches out towards the light, growing in the direction of the artificial light source next to this terrarium. It's blurry inside, thanks to the rotting slug excrement and excessive condensation, but it looks like another plant is also attempting to revitalize itself. You can see it in this shot. Again, it's blurry, and the shot itself may look strange. Plants oftentimes will attempt to grow root systems essentially into the air in extremely humid environments, and I think that's what we're seeing in this shot here. The isopods continue to survive. They scurry around all day, above ground and below. Centipedes stalk the other inhabitants, mostly springtails, and attempt to eke out their own survival. And I say centipedes, but it may just be the one centipede. So, the persistent survival of these small animals begs the question, how long will this jar survive? Another year? 5 years? 10 years? The centipede, which may be the last of its species, will eventually die, but the other species appear to have a population large enough to sustain themselves. So I'm not sure how much longer this will last. But if you like this video and want to know how it will fare in the future, hit that subscribe button and stick around for updates on the Wasteland Terrarium, along with the other more aesthetically pleasing terrarium videos I'll post along the way. Have a good one.